college. And so when we're talking about the current level of development, I have a number of students who really do not seem to have the emotional maturity or the intellectual curiosity or the ability to monitor their learning. And I'm wondering if anybody else sees that we have learners at NIU who really need a considerable amount of support to be successful in college.
Davion?
To elaborate more on what you're saying, I do agree with that to a certain extent. I do feel that our students coming into college aren't well equipped into college because I feel like the K through 12 system, especially those last few years of college, of high school, fails to incorporate into the curriculum more college preparatory topics, not just involving, the content that they're learning in their courses, but also the other aspects that go into college. But I also feel like that also, in part, is our fault as instructors, both on the higher ed level and at that level, because I feel that some of us fail to realize that as times are changing, certain methods that may have worked with previous generations may not work with current generations. So I feel that we must also learn to be adaptable in our methods of teaching. So to ensure that we are getting this material to them in a way that they'll be able to obtain it and to be able to apply it in their experiences.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent point. Does anybody like to maybe add something to that? It sort of brought up the question for me of then, if students are coming to Northern and they aren't prepared, what is our sort of obligation to them in terms of getting them prepared? Like, what can we do to help ensure that they're prepared when they get here, or if they get here and they're not prepared, how do we address that problem? But I know we have lots of stuff to talk about. I do want to, we're about halfway through the session already, so if somebody has something else to add on this particular idea, feel free to jump on. Otherwise, I'm going to move ahead, if that's okay. Yeah, double-edged sword. That is very true. All right, great. I was going to have us rank these principles in terms of their importance, but since in the interest of time, I think we're just going to skip this one. I think we've already kind of gone through that a little bit anyway. But I really did want to kind of hit on this next question, which just take a minute to think about this. And which of these 7 principles do you think is most evident in your teaching? All right. And then sort of piggybacking on that, which of them would you like to include more of in your teaching? So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that. But if somebody would like to share, that would be great. I would say for me, I tend to really kind of want to hit that. I want to meet those students, and I tend to try to be very student-centered in my approach. And so that's one of the, I kind of hinted at it earlier when I talked about the motivation piece and the metacognitive piece. And the metacognitive piece is something that I always try to work into my teaching as much as I can. One way you can do that is, oh yes, put the 7 principles back up, you bet. Sorry about that. Oh, whoops, going the wrong way. where was I at? Oh yeah, because and you can do that in simple ways, right? You can have students just write short reflections about maybe what they're learning. I always like since I taught in public schools too, I would use an exit slip where in order to get out of class, a student would have to sort of write down something that they had learned, or something they had learned about themselves on that, to leave class. And it wasn't really about what they said. It was more about getting students just in that habit of always reflecting on what they're learning. Because like I said, my goal was always to make people self-sustaining learners, right? I want people to be able to do this on their own. And to me, the most important part for students is being motivated and being aware of the gaps that they need to fill. All right, well, I know we've taken up already half of the time. And I know Megan has quite a bit to get through too. But if somebody would like to maybe add a little something about what they see in their own teaching.
I see some answers here actually in the chat pod.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not in the chat pod right now. I probably should be.
Jeanette says, in nursing, it's important to assess their prior knowledge. Can they do a skill well, for example, or do they need to practice?
So that's more that fourth point there.
I'm seeing a lot of emphasis here. Everyone's to develop mastery and skill level.
Yeah, and that would kind of make sense. Good. And just kind of on that, are there any of these principles that you maybe would like to see yourself bring more into your class? Yes, Davian.
I would say one thing that I would want to incorporate more is to become self-directed learners. Students must learn to monitor and adjust their approaches more to learning.
Yep.
I feel like I can relate to this a lot in my experiences, both working as a teaching assistant and a student. I think we need to find a way, or students need to find that realization within themselves to realize, there's no one way to be a student, and to realize what methods really work for them and what methods really don't work for them. And in realizing those methods that don't work for you, just being able to be open to finding other ways to being a student into learning, figuring out which ways work for you best and how to capitalize off of those methods the best so that you can be as successful as possible.
Yeah, and that's very tough to do, right? It's really, it's hard to look at yourself and say, hey, I'm not doing this right, or this is an area that I need to improve in, right? So that's sort of where we as educators come in. We can help to do that. But really, that's a great thing to talk about, because what you're doing right is you're creating someone who is moving from a point or to a point where they can teach themselves pretty much anything, right? Because if you're motivated to learn something and you're aware enough about your own learning to be able to get to the type of materials that are best suited for your learning style, and avoid the ones that are not well suited to your learning style, you're gonna be able to pretty much learn anything, right? Especially with all of the information that is out there. As long as you can find the information you need, you'll be able to learn it. Good. All right. Well, I've kind of run over my allotted time, so I am going to turn this over to Megan. But if anybody has any other questions, feel free to jump on right now. This is your one more chance. We will have a little question time at the end as well. So, but thank you very much. And Megan, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. You know, I really did love one of the key aspects that Susan Ambrose brought up in her book was that we need to be smarter graders, which I thought was kind of an interesting concept. And she was telling us that as an instructor, so that we don't get bogged down in our grading, we should save our commentary and our feedback for areas where students are allowed to revise or to continue practicing those particular skills. You know, if you tell them something, you know, for future reference, you might want to do X, Y, and Z, but it's not another activity they'll get to practice again in your course. You might not want to waste all your time putting feedback in that particular area. So I thought that was kind of interesting. She said to grade smarter, not to grade more. So, let me get through some of these. All right. So one of the key concepts to kind of go along with that is the course climate. And I think this is going to be a particularly interesting topic for us to discuss in here. I'm really glad I didn't use breakout groups since they're kind of acting up today. But the course climate is something that you as an instructor have some influence over. You don't exclusively control it, but you have a say in, you know, kind of the tone that you set for your course. So you do have her definition right here. I'll let you read that. Okay, so once you got a moment to read through this, maybe just some quick thoughts on, do you agree with this definition of a course climate? Don't agree? Is it leaving something out that should be in that definition? Okay, Alyssa thinks it makes sense. So this climate is, you know, just kind of a, by this instructor and author's definition, is kind of a collage of different factors. Right, and every course is going to be different because you're going to have different students enrolled. So, you know, part of it can be determined by even just the size of your classroom. How many people are enrolled? Yes, these are some of the factors, not all of them. You're absolutely correct, Greg. I couldn't agree more. You might have different ethnicities. You might have people from different generations, right? We're seeing a movement now where students are increasingly coming back to college at a later stage in their life. All sorts of demographics. You got it. The attitudes of students make a difference too. Well, it's funny you should say that because this is our next discussion activity. And this is actually a scenario that is outlined in Susan Ambrose's book. So I swiped it. I don't want you to think that I came up with this one on my own. I'm going to give you a scenario on the next slide where the instructor thought that they were just going to present some material and they were going to have a discussion on the material presented in the readings. And instead, kind of an argument broke out in the course. So your role now is to take a look at this and tell me, as an instructor, how would you address this situation? It'll be interesting to compare how some of us would react versus what the author recommends doing. All right, so here's the scenario. Economics students are analyzing an article and they're discussing, or they're supposed to discuss, the cost of illegal immigration as it pertains to the US economy. Student A says that this article is biased and does not represent the situation. Student B turns around and says to student A, why do you have to make everything about race? This is just about money and factual information. Student C says, my ancestors came here with nothing and they went through the correct legal channels. As far as I'm concerned, illegals should be deported. Student D says, I am not comfortable discussing this. And student A, going back to our original first student, says to another group of students, you're Mexican, why aren't any of you speaking up? So this is actually a situation that was described in Susan Ambrose's book, and I just wanted to see how we would strategize it versus what she recommends. So feel free, you can raise your hand and hop on the microphone, or you can type in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. Any takers? I don't think any of us are actually economic instructors, but I think we can still pretend. All right, Davian, do you want to go ahead?
I think Davian dropped out on us.
All
Looks like
right.
he's coming back.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, I'll read a couple of the things that are coming in on the chat pod. I see some really interesting answers here. So Jeanette says that she would first address the conflict that's happening. Justin thinks that the teacher has to take control of the class and steer them back towards the topic and explain that undocumented immigrants and even immigrants as a whole have helped with building this country and how the economy works. Greg says, he might say something like, it seems like we have several options here and I acknowledge everyone's ideas. Let's focus on the question. Okay. Great. So that's part of being a facilitator, right? If somebody gets off topic, you might want to steer them back to the original question.
Yeah, I actually was in a similar situation as a student in a class where something came up and it was astonishing how quickly it sort of devolved into a shouting match between students. So I mean, it was very uncomfortable, I will say that.
Wow. I've never actually been in a classroom like that. That's interesting. Thanks for the perspective. Yes, a reminder that one of the rules of the class is to always be respectful. Okay.
I think that, this is Jeanette, I think that's really important. I teach psych, so there's lots of, people have biases or different ideas of certain illnesses, etc. So I always say, everyone can have an opinion, but we need to be respectful of each other and not judgmental. So again, in my class that works. In this class, I think addressing that conflict is important and then getting back to the topic at hand, because this seems very heated.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have that rule from the get-go, so then we could always go back to that and cool it down and just remind people, because people get passionate about what they believe. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. All right. I know I've got, all right. Davian, thanks for coming back. Let's see. Encourage the room to be a safe space. Yes, absolutely. To be mindful of others and their experiences. Interesting. You should say that. Yes, and hopefully the teacher did set the expectations, for the course early on. That isn't to say that even though you set those expectations early on, that you don't need to remind them of it throughout the course. I know we do have one other discussion question, chat question to come up with after this. So if it's all right with you, I'll give you some suggestions from the author, what she would encourage in this type of a situation. And I threw this one in here just because I think right now there is a lot of political tension going on, and I thought this could easily happen in a course, and certainly Mike mentioned he was in a course where something like this happened, so I guess it really is within the realm of possibility. So a couple of things that Susan Ambrose really stressed is that you need to address hot topics and tension early on in the course. So if you see this happening, one of the first things you have to do is you do have to kind of steer the conversation. And there are some things that you can do about this. She said, always model the inclusive behavior, which I think a lot of you have already mentioned. Like everybody has a right to say what they want, as long as it's respectful, right? So like everybody has a right to be part of the conversation, but it still needs to be a conversation, not an accusation. Something that she said that's within your control is that you need to look for every opportunity to turn, this type of a potentially, stressful situation into a learning opportunity. And the ways that you can do that is to carefully monitor your course material. So if student A says that this article is biased and does not represent the situation, you could say, okay, that's a really great perspective. Let's take a look at that. Why do you say this? And also take a look at your course material. Who was this written by? What type of an author? What type of a background do they have? Do you have a diverse, collection of reading material for your students? That's something that's within your control. She also says to be very careful about making sure to consider your students holistically. So your students are coming from many, many different diverse cultures and backgrounds. It is appropriate to say to student A that their last comment was inappropriate. You're Mexican, why aren't any of you speaking up? The idea here is that nobody can speak on behalf of one group of people, right? So, there might be 4 or 5 different students with Mexican heritage, but they might have had very different experiences. So it's not okay to say that they need to represent, an entire group of individuals. And student D who says, I'm not comfortable discussing this, you could ask, what are they uncomfortable about? But you don't have to force them to take a side in the issue. You could ask them, let's explore this. Why is this an uncomfortable topic? Greg Kunderman, would the professor have the discussion with student A privately? She talks about both. She wants to model inclusive behavior, and that's what you need to do in a public setting. You want to publicly model your behavior for everybody, but yes, she does say that you can privately pull aside student A. She usually mentions that you should wait a little bit to talk to student A. You wouldn't probably pull them out into the hall right in that situation. It's already a little bit tense. You want to keep everybody together kind of in a group environment and try to diffuse the situation. But later on, you would probably talk to student A. So, but yes, she always goes back to saying be prepared for sensitive issues. Bring up, a diverse collection of reading material so that you can talk about different perspectives on supposedly the same topic, and always create these moments of discord into a learning opportunity. Okay, I know I just kind of breezed through that one. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I do want to move on to our next question unless anyone has any other questions. Okay, I will move on. If you think of anything, feel free to hop into the chat conversation over there. All right, so at the end of the book, she actually titles the chapter, applying the 7 principles to ourselves. And it's part of a larger statement, but I thought this was kind of the main gist of what Susan was getting at. Teaching is a highly contextualized activity because it is shaped by the students we have, advancements in our respective fields. I think Mike mentioned something about access to technology earlier, changes in technology, and so on. Therefore, our teaching must constantly adapt to changing parameters. So her stance on this is that we continue to ask our students to grow, to learn, to expand their knowledge and skill base, but she holds teachers to those same values. She thinks sometimes we can get a little too comfortable. We keep reusing the same material. And to a certain extent, that's fine, but each course you should be trying something new. It's this idea that we never peak as an instructor. We always have room to grow. So with that in mind, I have 2 questions here. Oh, I'm sorry, I had 3. Because I wanted to take a look at our current climate. And again, climate, are we talking about worldwide climate, US climate, classroom climate? But how has the pandemic impacted your teaching? What role does the current political climate play in your course? And how do you foresee your face-to-face course changing once we return to campus? I think we all know that eventually we will get back there. So, you don't have to answer all 3. Maybe one of these questions appeals to you more than the other. So again, feel free to hop on the mic, or the chat pod is at your disposal. And while you're thinking about that, I did start the recording. I forgot to turn it back on right away after we got back from our breakout group, so I apologize. It'll be a little bit shorter than usual, but I will send you a link to our discussion later. So apologies that I cut off the first little bit of the segment. Davian, go ahead. Okay, I think we lost Davian again, so sorry about that. Great. Greg says he does not think the political climate has played a huge role in his course, but combined with the pandemic, it has caused some mental health issues for students who are feeling isolated. Yeah, absolutely. I think it caused mental health issues even for some of the faculty too. Yeah. Greg, do you notice if people are excited to return to campus, or are your students enjoying the remote environment? Have they given you any indication, how they feel? Davian, if you're back, you can hop on the mic.
Hi, is my microphone working okay now?
It is, I hear you.
Alrighty, sorry about that, guys. So I'm gonna take a swing at the third question. How do you foresee your face-to-face course changing once we return to campus? I feel initially there will be some struggle with students with making that readjustment, although it may not seem that that readjustment was made for, quite some time in comparison to how long that they've been in school prior. That adjustment was still made, and it was made kind of rapidly, and it was sustained for quite some time. So I feel like some comfortability has been maintained in having to make those adjustments. But I feel like once we readjust to being back in face to face, I honestly see face-to-face classes being a lot more interactive and being a lot more involved with technology and media. I feel like this pandemic has really given us quite a great sense of how reliant we've all become on technology in our day-to-day interactions, and how much our current generations rely on these technological advancements for their learning styles. So I think it's going to teach us a lot about the learning styles of students and the teaching styles that we incorporate into our curriculum.
Great. You know, while you were logging back in, I had also asked, Greg, kind of a similar question. You know, I was curious, what are your students saying right now? You know, do they miss that face-to-face interaction? And he said that, as students go through as a cohort, so they do miss their social support. I mean, is that kind of, your impression as well?
Honestly, yes. Just speaking as a student myself, because I'm also a graduate student here, I feel like that social support is honestly a very key aspect in our experience here at NIU. Especially for me, speaking on my experience, not having that social support kind of made me experience a lot of feelings of alienation, especially to making such a big adjustment into being in grad school while also fulfilling so many other roles on this campus and outside of campus as well. So I feel like that social support within my cohort probably would have made that adjustment a lot easier, made it a little bit more manageable, and probably I would have had, someone to connect to.
Yeah, I believe it. I was just curious. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to hear from somebody who can relate, as a grad assistant who, kind of is one foot in both worlds, student and teacher. I think you get to see both sides of it. I see some conversation going on here in the chat too. Yes, Greg pointed out that, supporting students in the online classroom does require a unique set of skills. It certainly does. Justin, go ahead.
So, with this being my research topic, especially when it relates to COVID, I think that it's really difficult to actually get the learning environment to where it needs to be. Like, normally in the classroom, everybody would just be there. But I know finding different learning management systems that actually can not only benefit the student and actually provide group work and activities for students to do is more difficult, and it puts the instructor in the role, like we were saying in the last slide, that they need to be able to learn and adjust and make these new adjustments to actually being computer literate, because I think a lot of teachers may have been more computer, not illiterate, but not as tech savvy as they should be, because in a lot of situations you don't have to depend on technology. When you have a whiteboard in front of you, you could just go back to using a whiteboard. But I think just the social and physical impact of the change in classroom environment has made it difficult. And my research question is about how actually the classroom has changed and how we can keep that interaction portion between students, teachers, and how that's being facilitated. And I think it's really interesting that these 7 basic principles for smart teaching are what they are.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree. I think a lot of instructors maybe were more of novices, with their technology. If you don't have to use it, why learn all the ins and outs? And this has been a real learning curve. So it'll be interesting to see how many, I think instructors continue to try to use this, even in a face-to-face setting. I see some chat conversations going here that last semester, more students earned lower grades and incompletes than ever before. Many could just not motivate themselves to navigate forward. Yes. And certainly, I think that does have to do just maybe even with the pandemic itself, and not even, this change of environment. we never know exactly what's going on with our students. You know, they might be at home now with their whole family in the background. It has got to be just, you know, distracting to say the least. I know we're about out of time here. I can continue to hang out and see if anyone has some specific questions or if they had an answer they really wanted to share to some of these chat questions. But again, thank you so much for participating and for hanging in there with us when our breakout groups went down. So we'll keep you posted if we learn more about that. And I did try to record the bulk of this chat, so I will send you a link so that you can watch or listen to the recording. I apologize if I cut off the first segment. Mike, is there anything I'm forgetting?
No, I don't think so. If you've got any comments or questions, as Megan said, we will hang out and continue to chat, but we do understand that we are up at time here. So those of you who need to go, you are free to go. I would like to say that if you do need help, don't forget to contact us at the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. You can also schedule a one-on-one consultation or go to our website and sign up to attend another workshop. So hope to see y'all soon. But thank you very much. And we do appreciate, again, as Megan said, your understanding and patience with our technology issues today. So have a great day.
We've been saying that all along with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yes, Jeanette, it does happen to all of us. I'm glad you feel the same way. We're all on the same page.
Well, and our participants were very persistent in terms of coming back in to our
Thank you.
session when they got kicked out, which is very appreciated.
There's nothing personal.